The story begins with a woman reincarnated as the villain of a novel, Haley. She is currently transported by a paddy wagon while receiving scorn remarks from the crowd. According to the novel, Haley is a mage whose reputation runs deeper than her desire for love. The people she supports are the protagonists in the story. Although her deeds will elevate them, the opposite is reflected, as she is not only branded as a public enemy, but is now sentenced to Marin Castle for using forbidden magic. With only her to shoulder the blame, our character, now in the body of Haley, must venture out in the world under these circumstances. Accompanied by guards, Haley would note that the destination of Marin Castle is a land tainted with demonic energy. Upon arrival, Haley is confused as there isn't any sign of a castle nearby. However, she soon realizes that the destination is a one-way trip down the cliff, as she proceeds to crash into the water. As the situation becomes dire, Haley, looking for ways to survive, will spot a tree root to grab onto, though in this case, a phenomenon would occur, causing the root to purify. As this happens, a mysterious individual will pull Haley out of the water onto land. With Haley confused, the individual, now known as a dryad, is the same tree root that was purified and proceeded to rescue Haley in the process. Now taking a rest, Haley would request the dryad to take her to Marin Castle. However, before he could continue, a tainted monster would begin lunging towards them. Passing the dryad, upon contact with Haley, the monster is purified back into a rabbit. Seeing this, the dryad would develop an interest in Haley's ability, and upon waking up, would inform her of the matter. Haley, taking notice of where she rested, would begin to see the effects when she came into contact with anything that was tainted with miasma. Now knowing the discovery of this ability, the two would begin to make their way towards Marin Castle. Upon arrival, noticing that the castle is tainted, Haley plans to purify it and begins to look forward to making this area her new home. A year would pass, and we begin to see the changes as Haley and the Dryad are growing a garden. The color change we see from Haley is the amount of miasma absorbed during the year's time. As for the food, she noticed that her appetite is satiated either through purification or daily intake. Still, these circumstances were in her favor. However, eventually a person would stumble upon Haley, mistaking it for a zombie, but realizing that this person is actually Raycart Winter, a male elite who would come to kill her. Though, before anything would happen, he would collapse onto the ground. Haley, confused as to why he's here, would bring him back into the castle. Now lying in critical condition, Haley would note that in the original, when Haley was sentenced here, she would die at the hands of Raycart. This would trigger an event, such as causing demons to appear. With Castle Marin not purified and feeding off of Haley's negative emotions, this would cause the leading cast to join together for subjugation. In addition, Raycart wouldn't be the same, as he would become a hybrid, losing his human identity. Noting this, Haley decides to purify him, knowing that out of the male leads in the story, Raycart was an innocent victim. Regaining consciousness, Raycart, although wary, will ask about his whereabouts, only to find that Marin Castle isn't what the rumors have stated it to be. Haley also takes note that Raycart may have lost some memories after introducing herself as Haley, though this would later not be the case, as when we move over to Raycart, he finds that although similar in name and appearance, her personality does not match, only confusing him evermore. We now look into the past of Raycart Winter. His upbringing, should we say, is different from normal. As his father would tell him, his existence is for the sake of the family, as he wants to create a perfect heir, one with no emotions, disciplined, and live through the will of the family. This will remain true after their family fell to ruin, as his father's dying breath would assign him a mission to take revenge by going after Haley. Though it's important to note that Raycart only sees revenge as a duty. Without emotions or a sense of self, he would go on to challenge Haley, but lose in the process. Confused as to why he lives, Haley informs him that his existence will be proof of his family's ruin and will not go into details on the matter. After this, he would continue to challenge Haley, but the result was his loss, as well as his sense of duty now replaced with curiosity. But before he confronted her, news would already spread of her being exiled to Marin Castle. Now attempting to move on, he couldn't help but lose a sense of purpose and would decide to head over to Marin Castle to finish what he started. Now, when we move to the present, we see Raykart currently chopping wood. Concluding that Haley has lost her memories, he begins to wonder what he should do and decides to continue watching her to find his purpose. Now, over to Haley. She wants to create a civilization for Marin Castle. With the help of Raykart arriving here by a map, the two would set out to scout the area of the land in search of a town. As the two venture into the forest, Haley would notice a lake filled with demonic energy, with dreams of one day purifying the water to a clear blue resemblance. Raykart was taken aback as these desires were foreign to him. Eventually, they would encounter people who were infected. While Raykart would step in to slay them, Haley would purify Raykart to ward off the miasma. These people, who were once labeled as heretics, rebels, and criminals, are the reason Haley refuses to purify them, as the situation could grow dire. As they set up camp to rest, Haley begins to wonder about her body in the tainted lands, as not only would she no longer require food, but sleep as well. As her thoughts linger, Raykart would tell Haley that when they reach town, they should go by a different alias for her safety. The following morning, they would finally reach the destination of the production city of Selvin, finding a tavern that would now have a place to stay as well as food provided. Upon viewing the delectables of meat, spices, and vegetables, the two would begin to dig in and feast for the occasion. With Raykart finishing early, he would head out to gather supplies and inform Haley to acquire knowledge. Little does he know, Haley pretended not to know the ways of the world. Afterwards, Haley would ask the owner, known as Fatima, about the whereabouts of clothing shops, only to find that this area makes their own. With this known, Haley would ask Fatima to sell her some fabrics in exchange for gold. With Castle Marin having a vault stored with gold coins, this discovery would be useful for Haley in this situation. After acquiring many materials from Fatima, Raykart will return and sort out the materials that would be useful for their journey. With this, Haley would suggest that Raykart rest and regain his energy from their travel to Selbin. However, in truth, Haley plans to travel alone, not wanting to interfere with the story and allow the female lead to meet Raykart. With this known, while Raykart is asleep, as Haley begins to leave, she encounters Fatima, who gives her a farewell gift. Receiving this kindness, Haley wonders what her reaction would be if she knew who she actually was. As Haley begins to return, she encounters a group of men. Although wary, they wish her well and to travel safely, providing insect repellent in the process, which would leave Haley surprised. Though a familiar voice is eventually heard, which appears to be Raykart, wondering why she is leaving. Haley would inform him to follow his own path and not to intrude. Haley believes that her role in aiding one of the protagonists should end here, having prevented his original fate. With the plan to lead him out of the tainted zone, Haley had hoped for a better outcome for Raykart when he encountered the female lead of the story. Though this wouldn't be the case, as Raykart would refuse to part ways and follow Haley despite the risk of miasma taking over his body. With Raykart refusing purification and remaining stubborn till the end, Haley would then ask him, knowing her reputation and memories return, "Do you still wish to follow me?" To which Raykart would nod in agreement, as they reunite and begin to make way back to Castle Marin. Meanwhile, we switch over to a village where word is received that a young cardinal named Eugene Wadamart is investigating areas that were neglected by the kingdom. His dream is not only to purify the lands, but also to search for Haley. With his aide believing that she couldn't have survived, new intel had report sightings of Raykart Winters venturing deep into the tainted forest. Eugene, knowing the story between Raykart and Haley, would summon the knights to set out for Selbin. Switching to Haley, when the two returned to Castle Marin, Raykart immediately passed out due to exhaustion. As Raykart rested, Haley and the dryad, known as Bellflower, would discuss different ways to grow more food. Concerned about Raykart's appetite due to limited resources, Raykart would await and state that he could hunt his own. Amused at the statement, Haley would challenge him to give it a shot, to which a slingshot is crafted, and the results are shown in the process. As Raykart makes plans for Haley to purify different areas to create a road, Haley grows concerned due to her identity being discovered by the people. With this reasoning, Raykart again asks Haley why she commits the previous crimes, but more specifically, the Winter family. Though the real Haley is no longer present to answer, what Haley knows upon the surface is that it was done for love. In the novel, a man by the name of Cyril Bendition wanted to become the next heir. However, because of his origins, he had no support. So, out of love, Haley decides to destroy the Winter family that was arch rivals with Cyril's family. But as we know, the support she has given to the protagonist has only led her to where she is currently. The following evening, as Haley sits by the fire to think of ways to help around Castle Marin, a moth would appear, though this wouldn't be ordinary as it is tainted with demonic energy. However, upon contact, the amount of miasma absorbed would evolve Haley's purification abilities. This is shown the following morning, as now she no longer requires physical contact, increasing the range of her abilities. In addition, she can also draw out the demonic energy that was absorbed from her body, lining up a contrast of purification and demonic energy. We see an example of a normal bug transforming based on the amount of energy imbued into it. Though this would spark an idea for Raykart, it would soon be shut down due to its risk. Bellflower would suggest that purifying the tainted people would be helpful. Unsure at first, Haley would come across familiar faces as it appears the group of men from earlier is now seen tainted with miasma. Now finding it strange, Haley would deduce that something might be happening at Selby. Switching over to Selby, days after Haley left for Marin Castle, Eugene Waldemar would pay a visit to learn the whereabouts of Haley and Raykart. Although the methods of acquiring information would come into question, as any refusal from the locals would be sent to the contaminated zone, all for the sake of looking for Haley's whereabouts. For context, Eugene and Haley grew up together in an orphanage. This bond would allow the two to make a vow to protect each other like family. Now switching back over to Haley, she would postpone her decision on purifying the men and decide to head over to Selby to see the situation. Once they arrive at the border, they will find a camp to which Haley immediately recognized Eugene as the two will lock eyes. With Eugene surprised to see Haley, he would yell out to them, causing everyone to go after her. Now planning to escape, before they reach the contaminated zone, Haley would hear that the innkeeper, Fatima, is labeled a heretic for assisting Haley. Seeing her state, this causes Haley to snap, awakening the demonic energy. This would cause the soldiers to be taken aback. Though Eugene would ask Haley to speak with him, Haley, now in full control, would not hear it and would claim the area as her territory, stating, "If you cross this line, you'll die." With the soldiers fearing for the miasma spreading, they will flee and free Fatima. Now feeling relieved from her rescue, the group makes way back to Castle Marin. Now, with the addition of a new member, Fatima would prove her skills by becoming the new chef for everyone at the castle. As the group has dinner, Raykart would ask Haley about the history of the Blight Zone as well as the founding Duke of Castle Marin. With conspiracies about his time as a scholar, what is known is that this land itself was never owned by anyone except him. We see an example of a map along with three kingdoms, Neve, Holt, and Kaznatura, and the one Haley currently resides in is Marin territory. Due to the miasma, the kingdoms couldn't seize the land and decided to make a treaty, leaving it to its own devices. This would give Haley the idea of acquiring the land, with the tenant as Bellflower, the soldier as Raykart, the head chef as Fatima, and the duke being Haley. As the seasons pass, Haley's reputation would increase in the area of Holt due to the prior incident. However, with the supplies running low, the group instead sets out to Neve, specifically a commercial city named Grandis. This area would be a safe spot as fewer people would recognize her. Now arriving, the group would wander around exploring food, shops, and supplies. Arriving at the inn, an incident would take place outside where a group of men from Holt were injured by wolves. Though it seems these guys, as well as the people, are not in favor of helping them. Haley would take note that this hostility is part of the story, due to a commission to hunt some snow beasts. Poachers would trespass into another country, which sparks tension between Holt and Neve in the process. Eventually, the appearance of a priest by the name of Rango would have offers assistance to the group of men, though Haley would recognize this person not as a priest, but as the world's worst assassin raised by the wolves. Switching over to Rango's past, without the knowledge of his parents, he is raised by a group of wolves. Rango's life was full of enjoyment until his first encounter with humans. The hunters would mistake Rango for being captured, resulting in losing his family in the process. Not familiar with the world, Rango would walk the path of an assassin, hunting poachers who were threatening wolves. Now, in the present, with Haley planning to avoid him, Faith had other plans as the two would meet the next day. Raykart would make a deal to help rid of the poachers in exchange for a list of people who were abandoned in a contaminated zone. This request aligns with Haley wanting to distinguish the people who were infected and whether they were wrongly accused or put here as criminals. Now, with the deal established, the next morning both Raykart and Haley would meet up with Rango to make way over to the wolves' habitat. As they draw closer to the area, Haley would request that Raykart capture the poachers to bring them in for questioning. As Haley and Rango begin to converse, Rango notices that Haley is aware of his identity and will interrogate her, only for Haley to respond in kind. Rango's attempt to intimidate Haley will result in his loss, establishing the hierarchy between them. Afterwards, Raykart will return with the poachers who had an injured wolf cub in possession. Now, with Rango looking to finish them off, Haley would interject, coming up with an idea of offering out to one of the poachers. Though this method would be a loss for both men, as one is at risk of being contaminated with miasma, while the other would have to reveal to the authorities of poaching a snow beast. Rango couldn't help but be impressed by her methods, as when they returned to Grandis, this will reveal the activities preventing war from brewing between Neve and Holt. With business settled, Rango and Haley would conclude their deal and go their separate ways. Now that supplies were gathered, Haley and Raykart would begin returning to Castle Marin. Switching to Haley, now with the list in possession, she begins to ponder how the method should be done in purifying people without running the risk of their death. Now realizing the gravity disability holds, Haley would use the time each day to perfect her control over this power. And with that, we enter the season of summer. Currently, Haley and Raykart are planning a trip to revisit the village of Selban. A few months after Haley departed from Grandis, we switched to Eugene Waldemar in Selban. Along with the church, they would hear the news regarding the poacher's involvement in hunting the snow beast and would begin to investigate the matter. After the incident with Haley, Eugene has waited in Selban hoping to encounter her, though once information is received that the miasma is possibly spreading to Grandis Mountains, he would conclude that Haley is there and leave reinforcements here as he makes his way. Switching over to Rango, after finishing off the poacher who was held prisoner, he would then set a course to Selban. Now, in the present, with Haley and Raykart traveling, luck has it that they would encounter the same group of men who were tainted with demonic energy. Now reassured of her abilities, Haley puts her skills to the test by purifying them. With it being a success, the men would regain consciousness and thank Haley for saving them. The men would offer compensation, but Haley would refuse, knowing that their first encounter was enough reason to purify them. Now arriving at Selban, Haley would be surprised to find that the houses are empty. With no one seen in sight, Raykart would decide to investigate, but after reaching the entrance, Raykart would return, telling the others to run back to the contaminated zone. With little explanation, Raykart would explain that he encountered a holy knight tainted with demonic energy. The villagers at the time were hidden inside the temple, while Raykart would battle and proceed to cut off the head of the knight. Though this would lead to no avail, as the knight is currently chasing the group, shocking everyone with its survival. With the knight reattaching its head back in place, Raykart would face it. Knowing that the first method wouldn't work, he proceeds to pierce the heart of the knight, permanently defeating it. Upon investigation, Haley would find it strange that this holy knight would have a large portion of miasma dwelling in the heart, as divine power is attained through one's birth. Now concluding that the church is involved, Haley conducts a way to help the villagers in the aftermath. After assisting the villagers from tainted monsters, Haley begins to think of a plan until she comes across a familiar face. After the two get acquainted, Haley would hire Rango to search for Eugene Waldemar to relay a message to meet up with Haley. Now switching to the past, we view an encounter between Haley and Eugene. Haley, during this time, was on the run for the accusation of poisoning the King of Holt, making her way here. Eugene would share his thoughts on her standing trial and admitting that she was deceived by her lover, Cyril Bendition. However, Haley wouldn't listen. She knows that deep down, the people she supported have betrayed her, but her selflessness for others would rather take the blame. This, of course, would affect Eugene, knowing that the lengths she'll go to risk her life could leave him tainted. Eventually, the two would argue until Eugene would ask her to leave. It's known that Haley and Eugene knew one another since childhood, and their bond resembles to that of a family, which makes sense as to why Haley views Eugene as the only person she can lean on. However, because Eugene's affection surpasses that of family, Haley and Eugene's point of view with one another would clash, causing the two to never see each other again. Now in the present, with Eugene arriving with Rango, Eugene would meet Haley, though this time, Haley wouldn't be the same. Surprised, Raykart would step in as he is too close, with Haley reminding Eugene to keep a distance. With Eugene beginning to apologize, since this isn't the real Haley, Haley would respond that she didn't want to reminisce, but instead would request a favor. Informing Eugene about the church's methods regarding the tainted night, it appears Eugene is not aware of the situation around the church. In this case, Haley would request to protect the people of Selby from the church by presenting a story to pin the blame on herself to protect them. With Eugene against the idea, respecting her wishes, he would eventually agree. Now wanting to explain his side of the story regarding Haley's arrest, he would explain that the idea of Haley losing her mana and being sent to the contamination zone was his idea. Of course, this wouldn't sit well with Haley, as Eugene believed his idea was right and that she would survive. Little did he know, she didn't, as the person in front of him is a female lead who embodies the current Haley. Since Haley sees Eugene as one of the least of the worst male leads, she forgives him, though the latter half would leave him confused due to a story mention. But now that we're back to the topic of business, the two would come to an agreement to prevent a situation from occurring in Selby. That said, the men who were purified would have to hide, as if word of Haley's ability reached the church, they would hunt her down. Now understanding, the two would bid their farewells, and the group would make their return to Castle Marron. After a few days had passed, the castle began to become more lively as residents began to reside there. Though worried, Raykart would tell Haley that this wouldn't be a bad idea, as the families of the lumberjack men want to support her for saving their lives. Bellflower would also enjoy the company, as the lumberjack men would go as far as to fix Haley's room. With the condition of Castle Marron improving, Haley would thank them, with everyone responding in kind. Now with Raykart constructing plans to build a bridge that will connect to the Casnatura border, we switch over to Grandis, where Rango is residing. Before departing for Selby, he took on another request from Haley to find out more information on the fake holy knights the church created, though she would add to the condition to avoid Asta within Grandis. This will only make Rango curious, as Asta is known as the lost princess of Casnatura. For context, Asta is the long-lost child from the Casnatura kingdom. With her discovery found 12 years later in an orphanage, she would be known as the world's spirit summoner, as well as the Huron of the story. As we now begin to see Asta conversing with Cyril Bendition, they had a plan to prevent war from happening between Holt and Neve. Though, as you already know, this will already be resolved by Haley, which only caused confusion. Still, with the conversation coming to a close, Asta would head to a restaurant where she would begin to hear rumors about the story between Haley and Cyril relation before her exile. With Asta wondering if Haley survived, her attendant would assure her that the possibility of surviving in the zone is slim, though it may seem that the rumor was intentional. Now switching over to the Marron Forest, Haley, along with the lumbermen and Raykart, would begin to work on a construction project to build a pathway to southern Casnatura. With materials running low, they would make their way toward Grandis to restock on supplies. Though with Grandis on lockdown, Raykart and Haley would use an alias to enter the city under the names of Zeus and Hera. Now in Grandis, as things were looking bright, a giant bird would be seen in the air, though Haley would immediately recognize it. The owner of this bird would be the hero of the story, known as Asta Rosa Casnatura. Though in this instance, the spirit bird known as Ventus would try to attack Haley. With Haley confused at the situation, she would then remember that the bird is linked to the owner and would pinpoint Asta, telling Raykart to subdue her. Though before Asta could explain, she would be knocked out and quickly taken to a nearby cemetery. Once there, Haley would inform Raykart that the spirit bird attacked her due to the amount of miasma she had within. Now, when Asta awake, Haley would introduce herself as Marquess Marron and would proceed to tell her about an upcoming event that would require her presence. With this, Haley would tell her to go out and save the world. Though this would leave Asta confused before she could question any further, Haley and Raykart would leave the area. Now curious about the mysterious Marchioness, Asta would stumble across a priest, wondering why she was there. With Asta explaining the events that transpired, the priest would tell her to file a report. Now curious about the priest's position here, he would explain that his attempts to uncover corruption within the church are what led to the circumstances he is in currently. Unsure of the claim, Asta does consider the possibility and decides to reveal her identity to the priest, reassuring him that she'll restore his honor in exchange for escorting her out of the blockage of Grandis. Though we would soon see that this priest is actually Rango. Switching over to Haley. Now back from the cemetery, they would look for a place to rest until encountering a familiar face we seen earlier, being Cyril Bendichon, the man Haley loved. Upon viewing, Raykart would immediately attack Cyril. As mentioned in the beginning, Haley destroyed the Winter family out of love for Cyril, which meant that Raykart would also view him as an enemy. As the two engage in combat, Haley's presence will remain hidden, knowing that if she interferes in the fight, it would affect the city. With Raykart antagonizing Cyril for using Haley to destroy his family, going as far as to taunt him, Cyril would snap as the two continued to fight. This would take Haley aback, as Cyril is known to be calm and collected, but this fight would soon grab the public's attention, as one of the people would recognize both Raykart and Haley as the ones who kidnapped Asta. With Haley trying to calm the crowd, this method only begins to stir it, as now Haley would get Raykart's attention to leave the area. This would confuse Cyril, as he would wonder about the identity of the person with him. Afterwards, the two would settle near the border, with Raykart wondering if Haley still has feelings for Cyril. Haley would inform Raykart that those feelings are in the past, which will allow Raykart not to hold back upon his next encounter with him. Now with their cover blown in Grandis, they would reach a different city located at Holt's border to gather rope and materials needed to continue the construction of the bridge. Now as the group returns to Castle Marin, by the end of the summer, the construction project of the wooden bridge is complete. With the completion of the bridge, the villagers would celebrate the occasion. Haley would be enjoying tea until Raykart asked her to see his improvement, as he would easily slice a tree in one swing. This, of course, would shock Haley, as Raykart would explain that the cycle of being purified and being exposed to miasma might be the cause of his improvement. Haley would grow concerned, as she would think that these are the symptoms of him turning into a half-human and half-demon, like the original story. However, after seeing no signs of it, she would be relieved. Though later that evening, she would ask one of the lumbermen if there were any strange signs around Raykart, to which the man would reply that there were none. Now, beginning to think about the cause, she remembers the incident involving the tainted holy night and begins to wonder if she could recreate a complete core of the unfinished one that was placed in the heart of the night. Now attempting to create one, condensing its core becomes a task, as it would spiral out of control. But once Haley takes control, the core is made in full completion. Switching over, we are met with Asta within the land of Enif. She is following up on the information Haley told her regarding a demon appearing there. With Rango alongside her, he would begin to think that if Haley's words were true, he would have no choice but to acknowledge being on her side. Now over to Haley. With the discovery of making a core and leveling up, she would share the news with Bellflower. A few months ago, Bellflower and Haley were traveling in search of kin. However, upon arrival at the spot where the two first met, there would be no one there. Now, at the present, Haley would think that her new power will be able to locate Bellflower's kin. in addition to turning Bellflower into a half fairy, half demon. Comically, this interaction would cause the core to fall into a rosemary flower pot, absorbing its contents and sparking a phenomenon only to disappear within the plant. Now switching over to a farming couple near the land of Anif. Due to their crops growing near the contaminated zone, their payment would be reduced. The wife would decide to gather herbs by going deeper into the zone. However, what she would discover is something far worse. The next day, the husband would arrive at the gate to plead with the guards to save his wife from being possessed by a demon. With the locals and everyone confused, Asta would appear and reassure Mr. Dre to leave it to her, as she would try to get assistance from the church. Once arrived, upon speaking with Cardinal Mephius on subduing Miss Dre without taking her life in the process, the Cardinal will inform Asta that the risk is too great, though Asta, full of conviction in protecting the people, would declare she would face the demon alone if it came down to it. To which we now see a situation within the village, as Miss Dre, now possessed, is approaching. Now over to Nif's Lord's castle, with the report showing the reinforcements injured at the scene. The Lord grows concerned till hearing of Princess Asta going to battle for support. As we see Asta heading out with the people cheering, she would call upon Ventus to assure the people. Nearby, Haley and Raycart are shown present. Originally with plans to go shopping, their timing aligned with the situation that is happening. With Raycart wishing to go support, Haley would interject that this would run the risk of their identities being exposed. Though, moments later, Rango would appear and update Haley on the information she requested. In addition, he will also mention that the church within the land of Anif has a list of contaminated people as well. This would spark Haley's interest with the idea of infiltrating the place, though with Rango wondering how they would do it without him. Haley would assure him that the place would be empty. When we move over to the Temple of Anif, Cardinal Mephius, along with the priest, is certain that Asta won't survive upon encountering the demon. Though when word reaches that Cyril Bendition, along with the Nif Knights, were joining the fray, the Cardinal will have no choice but to assemble the Holy Knights and head out. Now, in the present, we see Haley and Raykar arriving at a stone chamber managed by the temple. Eventually, they will discover a secret entrance, and upon reaching the end of the passage, they will discover contaminated people held prisoner along with Holy Knights. Among them, Haley would recognize a guard from the beginning of her journey and would be confused to see him here of all places. And with that, we are all caught up. What do you think? Did you enjoy Haley's journey so far? Well, it's only just the beginning as it is still continuing. With that said, thank y'all for watching. Peace.